The vast Montana plains stretched endlessly under the merciless winter sky, snow blanketing the landscape like a cold shroud. A lone woman trudged through knee-deep drifts, her thin frame hunched against the biting wind. 3 small girls huddled, close behind her. Their faces were gaunt with hunger, their clothes inadequate against the frigid air. The woman's swollen eye and split lip told a story of recent violence, yet her gaze remained fixed ahead, determined, despite the impossible odds stacking against her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mei Lin had been walking for almost 2 days, her daughters, ages 8, 6, and 4, stumbling alongside her. Their journey had begun at the Chen family compound near Silver Creek, a small mining settlement where her husband's family had established themselves as prominent merchants, catering to the region's booming silver trade. Now, in the winter of 1882, she found herself cast out, a disgraced wife whose only crime had been giving birth to a 4th daughter instead of the son her husband's family had demanded. "Mama, I'm cold," whispered Lily, her youngest, her tiny voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Just a little further, little flower," Mei Lin promised, though she had no destination in mind. The meager bundle of possessions she carried held barely enough food for another day. "Remember the stories I told you about brave princesses? We must be brave like them now." As darkness began to fall, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, Mei Lin's hope faltered. The nearest town was still miles away, and her daughters could not survive a night exposed to the elements. In the distance, through the swirling snow, she spotted a faint light, perhaps a farmhouse or cabin. With renewed determination, she guided her exhausted children toward it. "Look there," she encouraged, pointing to the distant glow. "Someone has lit a lantern to guide travelers home." The lantern turned out to be a modest ranch house, its windows glowing with the warm light of oil lamps. A weathered sign swung. On its post, near the gate, "Haywood Ranch." Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. Mei Lin hesitated at the property's edge, her cultural reluctance to seek help from strangers warring with her maternal instinct to save her daughters. The decision was made for her when Lily collapsed in the snow, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion and cold. Gathering her youngest in her arms, Mei Lin approached the house, her other daughters clinging to her skirts. With trembling fingers, she knocked on the door. Jackson Hayward was finishing his evening meal when he heard the knock. The 35-year-old rancher lived alone, his life consumed by the daily struggle to keep his small cattle operation afloat during the harshest winter Montana had seen in decades. Already, he'd lost 8 head to the cold, and the remainder of his small herd looked unlikely to survive until spring. He opened the door, lantern held high, and found himself staring at a scene that momentarily robbed him of speech. A Chinese woman, badly beaten, holding an unconscious child, with 2 more frightened girls huddled behind her. "Please," Mei Lin said, her accented English careful and precise despite her circumstances. "My daughter needs warmth. We will not trouble you long." Jackson's surprise quickly gave way to action. "Get inside, all of you," he said, stepping back to make room. "This is no night for anyone to be out, least of all children." The warmth of the cabin enveloped Mei Lin like an embrace as she crossed the threshold, her daughters wide-eyed as they entered the unfamiliar space. The home was modest but meticulously kept, a single large room with a kitchen area, small dining table, and a bed in the corner. A loft above likely served as additional sleeping space. The simplicity reminded Mei Lin of her childhood home in China, before her arranged marriage had brought her to America 7 years ago. Jackson quickly cleared his table, spreading a blanket over it. "Lay the little one here," he instructed, already moving to stoke the fire in the iron stove. As Mei Lin placed Lily on the makeshift bed, he noticed the angry bruises on her face and the careful way she moved, suggesting injuries hidden beneath her clothes. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice gentle despite his imposing frame. Standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders from years of ranch work, his appearance contrasted with his careful movements as he wrapped the smallest girl in another blanket. Mei Lin hesitated, years of silence and submission making truth difficult. "My husband's family no longer wanted us," she said simply, keeping her eyes lowered. "I gave birth to another daughter 3 weeks ago. They expected a son." The implications hung in the air between them. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he asked no further questions, instead turning his attention to the practical matters at hand. "Your little one's starting to warm up," he noted, placing a gentle hand on Lily's forehead. "She'll be all right. Are you and your other girls hungry?" Before she could answer, Mei Lin's own knees buckled, the last of her strength deserting her, now that her children were safe. Jackson caught her before she hit the floor, his strong hands steadying her. The contact made her flinch instinctively, a reaction born from recent experience. "Easy now," he murmured, helping her to his single chair near the fire. "You're safe. Here." Over a simple meal of bean stew and cornbread, the best Jackson could offer from his limited winter stores, Mei Lin introduced her daughters, Jiang Min, called Minnie, the eldest at 8, Hui Ying, called Heather, 6 years old and solemnly quiet, and little Lily, 4, who had regained consciousness and now stared at Jackson with curious eyes as she ate tiny bites of cornbread softened in broth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And the new baby?" Jackson asked, noticing the absence of an infant. Mei Lin's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "They kept her. My husband's mother said she would find a family who would take her as a servant. When she is old enough, I was not permitted to name her." The casual cruelty of this statement hung in the room. Jackson's weathered face hardened momentarily before he mastered his expression. "And your husband allowed this?" He did not stop. Mei Lin replied, her voice flat. "When the midwife announced another girl, he left the room. I did not see him again. It was his brothers who—" She gestured vaguely to her bruised face, unwilling to elaborate with her daughters present. As the evening progressed, Jackson made a bed for the girls near the stove, using spare blankets and his own winter coat as padding on the wooden floor. The children, exhausted from their ordeal, fell asleep quickly, their small faces relaxed for the first time in days. "You should rest too," he told Mei Lin, offering her his bed while he prepared to sleep in the chair. She shook her head firmly. "I cannot take your bed, Mr. Hayward. You have already shown more kindness than I could expect." "Jackson," he corrected gently, "and it's no trouble. You need it more than I do tonight." Their quiet argument was interrupted by a pounding on the door that made Mei Lin startle violently, her eyes wide with sudden terror. Jackson motioned for her to stay quiet as he moved to answer it, one hand dropping casually to the rifle that stood by the doorframe. 3 men stood outside, their horses stamping impatiently behind them. The leader, a stocky man with cold eyes, stepped forward when Jackson opened the door. "Evening, Hayward. Name's Orson Chen. Looking for some runaways. My brother's wife and kids. Thought they might have passed this way." Jackson's expression revealed nothing as he blocked the doorway with his considerable frame. "Haven't seen anyone. Storm's getting worse. You boys should head back to town before the trail disappears completely." Chen's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Mind if we look around? Woman's half crazed, might have broken in without you knowing. Dangerous to have around, especially with kids." "Nothing to see," Jackson replied evenly. "Just me and an empty cabin. Been that way since my wife passed 3 years back. For a tense moment it seemed Chen might challenge this assertion, but the howling wind and intensifying snow made the prospect of a prolonged confrontation unappealing. If you see them, send word to Silver Creek. Family's worried sick about those girls. I'll keep an eye out, Jackson promised neutrally, maintaining his position in the doorway until the men remounted and disappeared into the swirling darkness. When he turned back to the room, he found Mei Lin standing protectively over her sleeping daughters, a kitchen knife clutched in her trembling hand. The sight struck him. This small, injured woman prepared to defend her children against impossible odds. Something about her quiet courage resonated with him deeply. "They're gone," he assured her softly, "and I don't expect they'll be back tonight. Not in this weather." The knife lowered slightly. "Why did you lie for us? You do not know me or my children. We could be exactly what they claimed." Jackson's weathered face softened with a hint of a smile. "Ma'am, I've worked with cattle long enough to recognize when someone's been branded unfairly. Those men weren't looking for family. They were hunting property." Mei Lin couldn't argue with his assessment. In the 7 years since her arranged marriage had brought her from Guangdong province to Montana territory, she had been treated more as an acquisition than a person. Her value measured first in her bride price, then in her ability to produce a male heir. When she had failed for the 4th time, that value had disappeared entirely. "Tomorrow, when the storm breaks, we will leave," she stated, though she had no destination in mind. "I will not bring trouble to your door." Jackson studied her thoughtfully. "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Mei Lin had no money, no friends outside her husband's family, and no skills that would easily translate to employment in a frontier town deeply suspicious of Chinese immigrants. The recent passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act had only intensified the prejudice she would face. "I will find a way," she said with more confidence than she felt. "For my daughters I must." Something in her determination struck a chord in Jackson. He glanced around his modest cabin, feeling its emptiness acutely for the first time in years. Since losing his wife Emily to pneumonia, he had existed rather than lived, the ranch slowly failing around him as his heart remained mired in grief. "I have a proposition," he said carefully. "This place needs tending. I can't give it while managing what's left of my herd. The cabin needs a woman's touch, and I've got a vegetable garden come spring that I've neglected badly." Mei Lin regarded him warily. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Hayward?" "A business arrangement," he clarified quickly. "You and your girls need shelter and safety. I need help around the place. The cabin's small, but we could partition the loft for privacy. You'd have food, protection, and I'd pay a small wage you could save." "Why would you do this?" Mei Lin asked, her experiences having taught her to mistrust unexpected generosity from men. Jackson's eyes drifted to a small daguerreotype on the mantel, a woman with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to hold both joy and sorrow. "Because Emily would have opened the door to you without a second thought, and because those girls deserve a chance." The simplicity of his answer made Mei Lin's eyes fill with tears. She quickly blinked away. "I cannot accept charity." "It's not charity if you're working," he pointed out practically. "And I suspect you're no stranger to hard work." This observation was accurate. Despite her husband's family's relative prosperity, Mei Lin had never been spared labor. From dawn until dusk, she had cooked, cleaned, served, and submitted to the demands of her mother-in-law, all while caring for her daughters with whatever energy remained. "I would need to know that my daughters would be safe," she said, taking her first tentative step toward accepting his offer. "No one will harm them while I draw breath," Jackson promised, the quiet certainty in his voice more convincing than any elaborate oath could have been. As the night deepened and the storm howled around the small cabin, Mei Lin finally allowed herself to rest on Jackson's bed, her daughters safely asleep nearby. For the first time since giving birth to her fourth daughter, she permitted herself a fragile hope that there might be a path forward for her small, broken family. Unknown to both of them, the three men who had come searching were not simply returning to Silver Creek. Orson Chen, brother to Mei Lin's husband Feng Chen, had recognized the faint footprints leading to Jackson's door, despite the rancher's denials. As they rode through the blizzard, he was already formulating plans to return, not out of concern for Mei Lin or her daughters, but because no one defied the Chen family without consequences. "We'll come back when the storm breaks," he told his companions, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Hayward's harboring them, sure as anything." "Why bother?" asked one of the men, hunched miserably against the cold. "Feng's already arranged to marry the Wu girl from San Francisco. She's from good family stock, bound to give him sons." Orson's expression darkened. "It's the principle. No one steals from the Chens, even if it's damaged goods. Besides, those girls are still Chen property. They'll fetch a good price from the right buyers when they're older." The implication of his words was clear and horrifying. The fate Mei Lin had feared for her newborn daughter was intended for all her children. The three men continued through the storm, their intentions as cold as the wind that followed them. Back at the ranch, Jackson sat in his chair near the stove, keeping watch over the sleeping family that had literally appeared on his doorstep. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves like a living thing, but inside, for the first time in 3 years, the cabin felt like something approaching a home. As dawn broke the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and crystalline air. Mei Lin woke to find Jackson already gone, his side of the cabin neatly arranged. A note on the table informed her that he had gone to check on his cattle and would return by midday. Her daughters woke hungry and curious, exploring the cabin. With the resilience of children, Mei Lin, falling easily into familiar patterns, began to bring order to the space. She found flour and lard in Jackson's stores and prepared a simple breakfast of flatbread. By the time he returned, stomping snow from his boots at the door, she had swept the floors, organized his meager kitchen supplies, and mended a torn shirt she'd found in his mending basket. Jackson paused in the doorway, momentarily disoriented. By the transformation, the air smelled of fresh bread rather than the stale coffee and bacon grease that had become his cabin's permanent scent. The girls looked up from where they sat at the table, their initial wariness giving way to shy smiles. "You've been busy," he observed, hanging his coat on a peg. Mei Lin straightened, suddenly uncertain. "I hope I have not overstepped. I thought to make myself useful while deciding on your offer." "No, it's welcome," he assured her, accepting the cup of hot coffee she offered. "Lost 2 more cows in the night. This winter's determined to break me." The simple admission of vulnerability surprised them both. Jackson hadn't intended to share his struggles with this woman he barely knew, but something about her calm presence invited confidence. "I am sorry for your losses," Mei Lin said sincerely. "Your animals mean much to you." "They're my livelihood," he explained, warming his hands around the coffee cup. "Started with 40 head 3 years ago, down to 15 now, and those looking mighty lean." Mei Lin hesitated, then offered tentatively, "In my village in China, when cattle were sick in winter, my grandmother would make a mash of dried herbs and grain. It gave strength when grazing was poor." Jackson looked up with interest. "What kinds of herbs?" "I saw some growing wild near your creek last evening," Mei Lin continued, growing more confident. "With your permission, I could gather them when the snow melts in that area." For the first time, Jackson smiled fully, transforming his weathered face. "I'd welcome any help you can give, Mrs. Chen." "Please," she said quietly, "call me Mei Lin. I no longer wish to carry the Chen name. Mei Lin, he repeated carefully, respecting the weight of her request. It's a pretty name. What does it mean? Beautiful lotus, she replied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Though my father always said he named me for the plum trees that grew behind our house, Mei can mean either. This small personal detail, freely offered, marked a shift in their interaction. No longer merely a desperate woman seeking shelter, and a lonely rancher offering grudging assistance, they had taken their first step towards something that might eventually resemble friendship. As the day progressed, they fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Jackson repaired a broken shutter, while Mei Lin prepared a stew from his dwindling supplies, stretching the ingredients with skillful efficiency. The girls, quickly adapting to their new environment, helped with small tasks or played quietly with simple toys Jackson fashioned from scraps of wood and string. By evening, a tentative decision had been reached. Mei Lin and her daughters would stay, at least until spring, exchanging labor for shelter and protection. Jackson would partition the loft to create private sleeping quarters for them, and Mei Lin would assume responsibility for the household and garden once the weather permitted planting. It's a fair arrangement, Jackson assured her as they sat by the fire after the girls had gone to sleep. I've been letting things slide since Emily passed. Place needs a woman's touch. Mei Lin studied him thoughtfully. You must have loved her very much. Every day for 15 years, he confirmed, his gaze fixed on the flames. Childhood sweethearts. Followed me out here from Pennsylvania when everyone said I was crazy to try ranching in Montana territory. I am sorry for your loss, Mei Lin offered simply. Jackson nodded his acknowledgement. What about you? Was there ever before your marriage? Understanding his awkward question, Mei Lin shook her head. I was 16 when my marriage was arranged. I had never met Feng until our wedding day. Love was not expected, only obedience and sons. She unconsciously touched her still healing split lip. I failed at producing sons, and eventually my obedience broke too. Sounds to me like you succeeded at something far more important, Jackson observed, nodding toward the sleeping girls. Raised 3 fine daughters and had the courage to save them when it mattered. His words touched something deep within Mei Lin, a hunger for validation she hadn't realized existed. In all her years as a wife and mother, no one had ever suggested that her daughters were anything but disappointments or that her choices held value. As they sat in companionable silence, the future remained uncertain. The Chen family's reach was long, and Jackson's struggling ranch offered precarious sanctuary at best. Yet in that moment, watching the firelight play across the faces of her sleeping children, Mei Lin allowed herself to believe that perhaps the lotus of her name might yet rise from the mud of her circumstances to flower in this unexpected place. Unknown to them, the threat was already regrouping. Orson Chen had returned to Silver Creek and assembled 6 men, hardened enforcers who handled the family's more unsavory business dealings. The storm had delayed them, but their determination remained undiminished. By the following afternoon, they would be riding for Haywood Ranch, intent on reclaiming what they considered Chen property. The coming confrontation would test not only Jackson's promise of protection, but also Mei Lin's newly discovered strength. For in fleeing her husband's family, she had done more than escape abuse. She had challenged a powerful family's authority and sense of ownership. Such defiance could not go unanswered in the frontier territories where the law often extended only as far as a man's property line and the reach of his gun. Yet neither Jackson nor Mei Lin could have anticipated how their initial business arrangement would catalyze changes in them both, awakening in him a protective instinct dormant since his wife's death, and in her a fierce determination that had always existed beneath her carefully maintained submission. Together, They were about to discover resources within themselves that would surprise everyone who had underestimated the struggling rancher and the beaten Chinese woman who had appeared on his doorstep in the heart of a Montana winter. As night settled fully over the ranch, the snow began again, softer now but persistent. It covered their tracks, erased the evidence of the previous visitors, and created a temporary illusion of safety. By morning, the world would be transformed once more, a clean white canvas awaiting the next chapter of their unexpected story. The weeks that followed brought gradual changes to Haywood Ranch. Jackson had partitioned the loft as promised, creating a private space for Mei Lin and her daughters. Though sparsely furnished with only straw mattresses covered in clean blankets and wooden crates serving as nightstands, it was the first space Mei Lin had ever been able to call truly her own. Each night, she would tuck her daughters into their shared bed and marvel at the simple freedom of making decisions without fear of punishment. February gave way to March, and while winter maintained its grip on the Montana landscape, subtle signs of the coming spring began to emerge. The days lengthened incrementally, and occasionally the sun would shine with enough strength to melt the snow in patches, revealing the dormant earth beneath. During these brief respites, Mei Lin ventured out to gather the medicinal herbs she had promised Jackson, carefully drying them near the stove before mixing them with the last of his grain stores to create a nutritious mash for the weakened cattle. "I've never seen anything like it," Jackson admitted one evening as they sat at the table, the girls already asleep above them. "Lost only one more since you started that feed mixture. The others are actually putting on weight." Mei Lin accepted his praise with quiet dignity, though her eyes shone with pleasure at having contributed something valuable. "My grandmother was known for her way with animals. She taught me that proper care requires understanding both body and spirit." "Wish she could have taught me earlier," Jackson said ruefully, running a hand through his hair, now more neatly trimmed since Mei Lin had offered her services with scissors. "Might have saved more of the herd." "You cannot know what you have not been taught," Mei Lin replied simply, "but you learn quickly." It was true. In the short time they had lived under the same roof, a mutual exchange of knowledge had developed between them. Jackson had shown Mei Lin how to operate his ancient rifle, a skill she practiced diligently each day while he tended the cattle, her initial reluctance giving way to grim determination. In return, she had introduced him to unfamiliar cooking, techniques that transformed his basic provisions into satisfying meals, stretching their limited supplies with ingenious efficiency. The girls, too, were flourishing under this new arrangement. Minnie, the eldest, had appointed herself Jackson's unofficial assistant, following him during his chores and peppering him with questions about ranch operations. Heather, always the quietest, had developed a special affinity for the chickens, spending hours in the coop talking softly to the hens. Little Lily simply blossomed in the security of their new home, her laughter, rare during their first days, now a common sound within the cabin walls. What remained unspoken between the adults was the knowledge that this peaceful interlude could not last indefinitely. The Chen family would not simply forget about Mei Lin and her daughters. Jackson had ridden into the nearest town twice to gather information, returning with troubling news of inquiries being made about Chinese women and children in the area. Each time, he reinforced the locks on the doors and added another round of ammunition to the shotgun kept by his bed. One evening in late March, as a gentle snow fell outside, Jackson cleared his throat awkwardly as they finished their meal. "Been thinking," he began, staring into his coffee cup rather than meeting Mei Lin's eyes. "Might be safer if folks thought you had more permanent standing here." Mei Lin looked up from her mending, her expression carefully neutral. "What do you mean?" "Town's full of talk about a Chinese woman and her girls," he explained. Chen families put out word they're looking for a runaway wife who's unwell in the mind and kidnapped her husband's children, offering a reward too. Fear flickered across Mei Lin's face before she mastered it. We should leave. I will not bring danger to you after all your kindness. That's not what I'm suggesting, Jackson clarified quickly. Just thinking that if people believed you were here legitimately, as my wife, not just a hired helper, they'd be less likely to connect you with the Chen search. The proposal hung in the air between them, its implications expanding into the silence. Mei Lin's fingers stilled on her mending as she considered his words. You would claim us as family? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson nodded, his weathered face serious. Just on paper, for protection. Reverend Miller comes through next month with the circuit church. He could make it official, but it wouldn't have to change. This, he gestured vaguely between them, indicating their current arrangement. A marriage of convenience, Mei Lin stated, testing the concept. Exactly, Jackson agreed, perhaps too quickly. Nothing would change, except you'd have my name. Might make things easier if questions come up. Mei Lin considered the proposal carefully. In truth, their current living arrangement already invited speculation among the few visitors to the isolated ranch. A legitimate marriage would provide her and her daughters with legal protection that her status as a hired helper could not. Moreover, it would create a barrier between them and the Chen family's claims. I would need to be sure of your expectations, she said carefully. My previous marriage was not kind. Understanding darkened Jackson's expression. I've never raised my hand to a woman, and I never will. You'd be as free as you are now, just with the legal protection of my name. Mei Lin nodded slowly. Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Hayward, for the safety of my daughters. Jackson, he corrected gently, if we're to be married, even just on paper, you should use my given name. Jackson, she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. The decision made, they returned to their evening tasks. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted subtly. Though both maintained that nothing had changed, something intangible had transformed between them, a commitment made, however practical its origins. The following morning dawned clear and unusually warm, prompting Jackson to declare it suitable. For the spring inspection of the property boundaries, Mei Lin prepared a simple lunch for him to carry and watched from the doorway as he rode out, his figure gradually diminishing against the landscape of melting snow and emerging brown grass. With Jackson gone for the day, Mei Lin turned her attention to thorough spring cleaning of the cabin. The girls helped in their various ways. Minnie taking on increasingly complex tasks, Heather methodically folding clean linens, and Lily sweeping with a child-sized broom Jackson had fashioned for her. By midday they had opened the windows to the fresh air, beaten the dust from every rug and blanket, and scoured the wooden floors until they gleamed. They were hanging freshly washed curtains when Mei Lin heard the approach of horses, multiple horses moving at speed. Her hands froze on the fabric as alarm coursed through her. Jackson wasn't due back until evening, and he certainly wouldn't be accompanied by others. Girls, she said calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs, go to the loft. Now. The children, sensing her tension, obeyed without question. When they were safely above, Mei Lin moved to the window, carefully peering around the edge of the frame. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. 6 riders approaching rapidly, led by Orson Chen. With swift, decisive movements, Mei Lin retrieved the rifle Jackson had taught her to use, checking that it was loaded as he had shown her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind remained clear. She positioned herself near the window, where she could watch the approaching men while remaining partially concealed. Orson Chen and his companions pulled up about 20 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a semicircle that blocked the most obvious escape routes. With deliberate arrogance, Orson dismounted and strode forward, stopping just beyond the porch. Steps. "Mrs. Chen," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the open window. "I know you're in there. Your husband is very concerned about your well-being. It's time to come home with your daughters." Mei Lin remained silent, calculating distances and remembering Jackson's instructions on ammunition conservation. "Make each shot count. You won't have time to reload more than once." "The ranch is not here," Orson continued, his tone hardening. "We watched him ride out this morning. There's no one to protect you now." Still, Mei Lin maintained her silence, though she raised the rifle, sighting along its barrel at Orson's chest. She had no intention of firing first, but she wanted to be ready if the situation escalated. Frustrated by her lack of response, Orson signaled to his men. Two dismounted and moved toward the small stable where Jackson kept his wagon and spare horse. Another approached the chicken coop, casually kicking over the water trough beside it. "We can make this difficult if you prefer," Orson called out. "But you will be returning with us today. Your new daughter is waiting. Isn't that what you want? To be reunited with your baby?" The mention of her infant daughter sent a shaft of pain through Mei Lin's heart, but she recognized the manipulation for what it was. The Chen family had no intention of reuniting her with her baby. They were using the child as bait. Orson's patience visibly thinned. "Enough games," he snapped, gesturing to his remaining men. "Burn her out if you have to." Two men approached the cabin, one carrying a kerosene lamp taken from his saddlebag. The intent was clear. They would set fire to the structure, forcing Mei Lin and her daughters into the open. This was the moment she had prepared for, but hoped would never come. Taking a steadying breath, Mei Lin opened the window wider and called out, "Stop where you are!" The men paused, surprised by her voice. Orson smiled unpleasantly. "Finally decided to be reasonable, sister-in-law?" "I am not your sister-in-law anymore," Mei Lin replied firmly. "I am not returning to the Chen family. My daughters and I have a new home now." Orson's expression hardened. "You have no choice in this matter. You belong to my brother, as do those girls. Your preferences are irrelevant." "I belong to no one," Mei Lin stated, raising the rifle so it was clearly visible through the window. "And neither do my daughters." Laughter rippled through the group of men. "You think you can fight all of us with one rifle?" Orson mocked. "A woman who probably couldn't hit the side of a barn." "I don't need to hit all of you," Mei Lin replied calmly. "Just you, Orson. And at this distance even I couldn't miss." The quiet confidence in her voice gave Orson momentary pause. He had expected hysterics, pleading, perhaps an attempted escape, not this cool-headed defiance backed by a credible threat. Before he could formulate a response, the sound of a shotgun being cocked came from behind the group of men. All heads turned to see Jackson Hayward sitting atop his horse at the edge of the clearing, his shotgun aimed directly at Orson's back. "Gentlemen," Jackson drawled, though there was nothing casual about his posture or expression, "you appear to be trespassing on private property." Relief flooded through Mei Lin at the sight of him, though she maintained her position at the window, rifle still trained on Orson. "This doesn't concern you, Hayward," Orson snapped. "This is family business. The woman belongs to my brother." "Interesting perspective," Jackson replied, dismounting but keeping his shotgun leveled. "Considering Mrs. Hayward is my wife, I'd say her presence here is entirely appropriate." The claim, though not yet legally established, sent a ripple of confusion through Orson's men. They exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly wavering. "You're lying," Orson snarled. "She's Feng Chen's wife. These are his children." "Check with Reverend Miller if you don't believe me," Jackson countered smoothly. "Now I suggest you and your men leave my property before this situation becomes unnecessarily violent." The standoff stretched taut as Orson evaluated his options. Though his men outnumbered Jackson, they now faced threats from two directions, Moreover, if Jackson's claim of marriage was true, the legal complications would multiply significantly. "This isn't over," Orson finally spat, gesturing for his men to remount. "The Chen family doesn't surrender what belongs to them." "Good thing Mrs. Hayward and her daughters don't belong to anyone then," Jackson replied evenly, maintaining his aim until all 6 men had remounted. As they rode away, Orson turned in his saddle for one final threat. "We'll be back, Hayward, with the law on our side." Only when the riders had disappeared from view did Jackson lower his shotgun and hurry toward the cabin. Mei Lin met him at the door, rifle still in hand, her face composed despite the trembling of her fingers. "Are you and the girls all right?" he asked urgently, scanning her for any sign of injury. She nodded, finally allowing herself to exhale fully. "We are unharmed, but they will return," as he said. "Let them," Jackson replied with quiet determination. "Next time, we'll be better prepared." Mei Lin studied his face, noting the steel beneath his typically gentle demeanor. "You came back early." "Saw their tracks crossing the north pasture," he explained. "Fresh prints, too many riders for casual travelers. Had a feeling they might be headed here." The girls emerged cautiously from the loft, rushing to their mother once they saw Jackson. He knelt to reassure them, his large hands gentle as he patted each head, promising that the bad men were gone and wouldn't be returning today. When the children had been settled with small tasks to distract them from the frightening encounter, Jackson and Mei Lin stepped onto the porch to speak privately. "They called your bluff about us being married," Mei Lin observed quietly. Jackson nodded grimly. "Won't take them long to verify it's not official yet. Reverend Miller isn't due for another 2 weeks. Then we must be prepared for their return. Before then," Mei Lin stated practically, "I will not allow my daughters to be taken." Something in her tone, a mother's implacable resolve, made Jackson look at her with new appreciation. The timid, beaten woman who had appeared on his doorstep weeks ago had been transformed by safety and purpose into someone far stronger. "We'll be ready," he promised. "I've got some ideas for securing the property, and we should practice shooting more regularly. Both of us." Mei Lin nodded her agreement, then hesitated before asking, "Did you mean what you told them about me being Mrs. Hayward?" "I meant every word," Jackson confirmed, his gaze direct and honest. "Paper or no paper, as far as I'm concerned, you. And the girls are under my protection now. That makes you family." The simple declaration touched Mei Lin deeply. In all her years with the Chen family, she had never truly been accepted as one of them. She had been property, not family, valuable only for what she could produce, not for who she was. "Thank you," she said softly, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Jackson cleared his throat, suddenly awkward with the intensity of the moment. "Well, we've got work to do if we're going to be ready for them. Let's start by reinforcing those shutters." The practical focus was a relief to them both, allowing them to channel their anxieties into constructive action. For the remainder of the day, they worked side by side, strengthening the cabin's defenses, reinforcing shutters, creating barricades that could be quickly deployed, and establishing clear fields of fire from multiple vantage points. As darkness fell, Jackson built up the fire while Mei Lin prepared their evening meal. The domesticity of the scene contrasted sharply with the preparations for conflict that had occupied their day. Yet somehow, the juxtaposition felt right. They were creating a home worth defending, not just a place to shelter. While the girls played quietly before bedtime, Jackson spread a map of his property on the table. "Been thinking about what Orson said about returning with the law," he explained, pointing to various locations. "If they bring the sheriff from Silver Creek, they'll likely approach from the south road here. But if they're smart, they might split their forces to cover potential escape routes." Mei Lin studied the map intently, her mind working through scenarios with remarkable clarity. The creek to the west, how deep is it in spring? Too deep to cross easily, Jackson confirmed. That's one direction we don't need to worry about. Until summer. Then we focus our preparations on the remaining approaches, she concluded, and we should establish a signal system in case we are separated when they come. Jackson nodded appreciatively at her strategic thinking. 3 rifle shots in succession. If either of us hears that, it means trouble. As they continued, planning late into the evening, a new dynamic solidified between them. No longer simply a protector and someone in need of protection, but partners facing a common threat. The transition had occurred so naturally that neither fully recognized its significance until Mei Lin, reviewing their defensive strategy one final time, referred to our home rather than your ranch. The phrase hung momentarily in the air. Between them, its implications expanding into the silence. Jackson looked up from the map, meeting her eyes with an expression that contained something more complex than simple agreement. Yes, he said finally. Our home. The next morning, Jackson rode into town to gather information and supplies, leaving Mei Lin to continue fortifying the cabin. He returned by mid-afternoon with provisions, ammunition, and news that sent a chill through them both. Orson Chen had, indeed, visited the sheriff in Silver Creek, claiming that his brother's mentally unstable wife had kidnapped his children and was being held against her will by a rancher with dubious intentions. Sheriff's planning to ride out here within the week to investigate, Jackson reported grimly. Chen's well-connected, owns half the businesses in Silver Creek. Law tends to favor those with money and influence. Rather than collapsing under this new threat, Mei Lin's resolve only strengthened. Then we must have proof of our marriage before he arrives. Is there any way to bring Reverend Miller here sooner? Jackson nodded. Already sent word by the general store owner's son. Miller should be here day after tomorrow, assuming the weather holds. The accelerated timeline gave their preparations new urgency. Beyond the physical fortifications of the property, there were legal matters to address. Jackson drafted a simple marriage contract that would establish Mei Lin and her daughters as his legal family, entitling them to his protection under territorial law. He also wrote a will, leaving the ranch to Mei Lin should anything happen to him. A possibility neither wanted to consider, but both recognized as prudent given the circumstances. The night before Reverend Miller's expected arrival, Mei Lin sat at the table long after the girls had gone to sleep, carefully sewing a simple white collar onto her best dress. A faded blue cotton that had seen better days, but was the closest and thing to formal attire she possessed. Jackson, noticing her efforts as he cleaned his shotgun by the fire, set aside his work and disappeared briefly into his bedroom. He returned with a small wooden box that he placed gently on the table beside her. Emily would have wanted you to have this, he said simply, opening the lid to reveal a delicate gold chain with a small pearl pendant. For tomorrow. Mei Lin stared at the necklace, then at Jackson, her eyes wide with surprise. I cannot accept such a valuable gift. It's not just for show, he explained quietly. If things go badly with the Chen family, that pearl could buy passage for you and the girls to San Francisco or beyond. It's insurance as much as anything. The practicality behind the gesture somehow made it more touching rather than less. This was not a frivolous gift, but a carefully considered safeguard for her future and her daughter's well-being. With trembling fingers, Mei Lin lifted the necklace from its box, its weight slight but significant in her palm. I will treasure it, she promised, and return it to you when the danger has passed. Jackson shook his head firmly. It's yours now. Emily had no sisters, no daughters. She would be pleased to know it's being worn by a woman of courage. The compliment, so simply stated, brought unexpected tears to Mei Lin's eyes. In her entire life, no one had ever described her as courageous. Dutiful, obedient, hard-working. These were the virtues that had been valued in her previous existence. The recognition of her inner strength by this quiet, steadfast man meant more than any material gift could have. As she returned to her sewing, the pearl necklace safely tucked away for tomorrow's ceremony, Mei Lin reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 months ago, she had been beaten and abandoned, trudging through snow with no destination and no hope beyond immediate survival. Now she was preparing to marry a man who respected her, fortifying a home she helped defend, and planning for a future she had never dared imagine. The danger was far from past. The Chen family's resources and determination remained formidable threats. Yet, for the first time in her adult life, Mei Lin faced uncertainty with something approaching hope rather than resignation. Whatever came next, she would meet it not as a victim, but as a woman who had discovered her own capacity for courage and determination. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the first gentle sense of spring across the awakening land. Within the cabin's walls, 2 people from vastly different worlds continued their quiet preparations. Not just for a wedding ceremony or a potential confrontation, but for the possibility of a shared future neither had anticipated when fate had brought a desperate mother and her daughters to a struggling rancher's door during the heart of a Montana winter. Reverend Miller arrived shortly after noon the following day, his aging mare pulling a small covered wagon that served as both transportation and temporary chapel for the circuit preacher. Tall and gaunt with a snow-white beard, the Reverend had been serving the scattered homesteads and isolated ranches of Montana Territory for over 20 years, bringing spiritual comfort and performing essential ceremonies for those too distant from established towns to attend regular services. Jackson greeted him at the gate, extending a hand that the older man clasped warmly. "Appreciate you coming on such short notice, Reverend." "When I received your message about the urgency, I rearranged my schedule," Miller replied, his deep voice carrying the remnants of a Virginia accent. "Though I admit I was surprised. Last time we spoke, you seemed determined to remain a widower." Jackson helped the preacher down from his wagon, choosing his words carefully. "Circumstances change. I'll explain everything, but first, come inside and meet Mei Lin and her daughters." Inside the cabin, Mei Lin had prepared a simple but generous meal, rabbit stew with dumplings and fresh-baked bread, a luxury made possible by Jackson's trip to town for supplies. She stood when the men entered, the girls gathered close beside her, all 4 dressed in their cleanest clothes with hair neatly combed and braided. Reverend Miller's eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of a Chinese woman and children in Jackson's cabin, but to his credit, his expression quickly settled into friendly welcome. "Mrs. Chen, I presume?" "Yes, Reverend," Mei Lin replied with a small bow of respect. "Thank you for coming. These are my daughters, Minnie, Heather, and Lily." The girls curtsied as they had been practicing all morning, earning an approving smile from the preacher. "Beautiful children," he observed, taking the seat Jackson offered at the table. "Now, I understand there's some urgency to this union." Over the meal, Jackson and Mei Lin explained their situation, omitting the more violent details in the children's presence, but making clear the threat posed by the Chen family and the imminent visit from the sheriff of Silver Creek. Reverend Miller listened intently, his weathered face grave. "I've heard troubling things about the Chen family's business practices," he admitted when they had finished, "and the law regarding Chinese immigrants is complicated at best, particularly for women." He turned to Mei Lin. "Are you certain this marriage is what you want, Mrs. Chen? Not merely a solution to your immediate difficulties?" Mei Lin met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Hayward has shown me and my daughters kindness when we had nowhere else to turn. He has treated us with respect and offered protection without demanding anything in return." She glanced briefly at Jackson before continuing. If joining our lives legally will secure my daughter's future, then yes, I am certain. The Reverend nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. And you, Jackson? Emily hasn't been gone that long. Are you prepared to take this step? Jackson's expression remained steady. Emily would have been the first to open our door to Mei Lin and her girls. I'm doing what she would have wanted, what any decent man would do. Very well, Miller concluded, rising from the table. Let's proceed. With the ceremony, then. I assume you have the necessary documentation prepared? Jackson produced the marriage contract he had drafted, along with official papers renouncing Mei Lin's previous marriage. Documents that might not stand up to intense legal scrutiny, but would be sufficient for most purposes in the frontier. Our territories where formal record-keeping remained inconsistent. While the Reverend reviewed the paperwork, Mei Lin and the girls cleared the table. Once the dishes were washed and put away, they rearranged the furniture to create a small, ceremonial space near the hearth, the heart of the home, as Mei Lin explained to her curious daughters. In my culture, the hearth represents family, continuity and blessing, she told them as they helped place Jackson's few houseplants around the area. It is good to begin a new family near its warmth. When everything was prepared, Reverend Miller positioned Jackson and Mei Lin before the fire, with the three girls standing solemnly to their mother's side. The ceremony itself was brief but dignified, a simplified version of traditional Christian wedding vows, adapted to acknowledge the practical nature of their union while still emphasizing the commitments they were making to each other. Jackson: Hayward, do you take Mei Lin to be your lawfully wedded wife, to protect and provide for her and her children, to treat them as your own family, and to remain faithful to this union for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jackson replied, his voice steady and sure. Mei Lin, do you take Jackson Hayward to be your lawfully wedded husband, to share in the responsibilities of this household, to support him in times of hardship, and to remain faithful to this union for as long as you both shall live? I do, Mei Lin answered, the pearl pendant at her throat catching the firelight as she spoke. Reverend Miller produced a simple gold band, another of Emily's possessions that Jackson had retrieved from safekeeping for this purpose. This ring is a symbol of your vows, the preacher explained, as Jackson slipped it onto Mei Lin's finger. A circle without end, representing commitment without reservation. Though they had both emphasized the practical nature of their arrangement, something shifted in the room as the ring settled onto Mei Lin's finger, a tangible symbol of a connection that had begun in desperation but was evolving into something neither had anticipated. By the authority vested in me by the Montana Territory and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Miller declared. You may seal your vows with a kiss. This part they hadn't discussed or prepared for. Jackson hesitated, looking at Mei Lin with uncertainty. She solved the dilemma by rising slightly on her toes and placing a gentle, brief kiss on his cheek, a compromise that respected both the ceremony and the boundaries they had established. The girls broke into smiles and applause, the solemnity of the moment giving way to childish excitement. Little Lily tugged at Jackson's hand, asking earnestly, "Are you our papa now?" The question caught Jackson off guard. He knelt to the child's level, choosing his words carefully. I'm your mother's husband now, which makes me responsible for taking care of all of you. If you'd like to call me Papa, I'd be honored, but you don't have to unless you want to. Lily considered this seriously, before declaring, I think I will, with all the decisiveness a 4-year-old could muster. Reverend Miller completed the necessary paperwork, providing them with both a marriage certificate and copies of all supporting documents. I'll file the originals at the territorial office when I reach Helena next month, he explained. Then these copies should suffice for any local inquiries. As the Reverend prepared to depart, he took Jackson aside for a moment of private conversation. This is an unusual situation, my friend. Are you certain you've considered all the implications? Jackson's gaze drifted to where Mei Lin was helping the girls package leftover bread and preserves as a traveling gift for the preacher. "I've considered enough to know it's the right thing to do," he replied. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." Miller studied him thoughtfully. "I've married couples with far less foundation than respect and shared purpose," he finally conceded. "Just remember that legal papers can create a marriage in name, but only daily choices build a true union. Be kind to one another. The rest tends to follow naturally." With that cryptic advice, the Reverend accepted the food packages from the girls, offered a final blessing over the newly formed family, and departed for his next destination, a mining camp some 15 miles eastward. As the wagon disappeared down the road, Jackson and Mei Lin stood side by side on the porch, watching until it was out of sight. The weight of what they had done settled around them. No longer simply two adults sharing living quarters out of necessity, but legally bound as husband and wife. "Well, Mrs. Hayward," Jackson said finally, testing the name cautiously, "I suppose we should get back to our preparations. Sheriff could arrive as early as tomorrow, according to what I heard in town." Mei Lin nodded, grateful for the return to practical matters. "I have been thinking about what to tell him," she said, as they returned inside. "The truth, but carefully chosen, yes?" "Exactly," Jackson agreed. "We stick to facts. We met when you were in need, developed mutual respect and decided to marry. Your previous husband was abusive, and you left to protect yourself and your children. All true, just not the complete story. And if he asks about the Chen family's claims," Jackson's expression hardened, "then we show him our marriage certificate and remind him that a husband's word carries more legal weight than claims from your former family. It's not fair or right, but it's how the law works out here, and we might as well use it to our advantage." The remainder of the day was spent completing their defensive preparations, finalizing escape routes for Mei Lin and the girls if the confrontation turned dangerous, establishing clear signals, and ensuring that both adults knew exactly what to do in various scenarios. By evening, they had done everything possible to prepare. After the girls were asleep, Jackson and Mei Lin sat at the table reviewing their plans one final time. The gold band on Mei Lin's finger caught the lamplight occasionally as she moved, a constant reminder of the day's ceremony. "Thank you," she said suddenly, interrupting their tactical discussion, "for everything you have done for us. Many men would not have helped strangers, let alone married one to provide protection." Jackson looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Don't need thanks for doing what's right," he mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "Besides, you've done as much for me as I have for you. Place hasn't been this clean or well organized since Emily was alive, and your cooking saved me from my own terrible attempts." Mei Lin smiled slightly at his deflection. "Still, I wish to express my appreciation. In my previous life, kindness was rare." "Shouldn't be," Jackson replied simply. After a moment, he added awkwardly, "I know, this marriage isn't what either of us would have chosen under different circumstances, but I want you to know I'll honor my vows. You and the girls will always have a home here, regardless of what happens with the Chens." The sincerity in his voice touched Mei Lin deeply. "I too will honor my promises," she assured him. "You have given us a new beginning. I will work every day to be worthy of that gift." Morning brought clear skies and a sharp wind from the north. Perfect weather for riders traveling from Silver Creek. Jackson rose before dawn, checking and rechecking their defenses, while Mei Lin prepared a hearty breakfast. They moved with the efficiency of a team that had practiced their roles, anticipating each other's needs with minimal communication. By mid-morning, Jackson spotted riders approaching, 4 men, led by a figure wearing the distinctive hat of a territorial lawman. "They're coming," he called to Mei Lin, who immediately sent the girls to the designated safe space they had prepared in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor. "Remember," she instructed them, kneeling at the hidden entrance, "stay quiet until Mama or Jackson comes for you. If you hear 3 loud knocks, use the tunnel to the stable like we practiced." The girls nodded solemnly, understanding the seriousness of the situation despite their young ages. Minnie, taking her role as eldest, Sister seriously gathered the younger two close as Mei Lin closed the trapdoor and covered it with a rug and chair. When she emerged onto the porch beside Jackson, Mei Lin looked every inch the respectable ranch wife, hair neatly pinned, wearing her best dress with Emily's pearl pendant and Jackson's ring prominently displayed on her left hand. The transformation from the beaten, desperate woman who had appeared on his doorstep was remarkable. Sheriff Thomas Burke of Silver Creek led the approaching party, his weathered face set in professional neutrality. Beside him rode Orson Chen, dressed in the fine clothes of a successful businessman rather than the rough garb he had worn during his previous visit. 2 deputies followed, their hands resting casually but pointedly near their holstered weapons. "Morning, Hayward," Burke called as they approached the yard. "Hope we're not interrupting your day." "Sheriff," Jackson acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" Burke dismounted, handing his reins to one of the deputies. "Got some questions about your living arrangements here." His gaze shifted to Mei Lin, assessing her carefully. "This the Chinese woman I've been hearing about?" "This is my wife, Mei Lin Hayward," Jackson corrected firmly, emphasizing the relationship in the name. Burke's eyebrows rose slightly. "Wife? That's not the story I heard from Mr. Chen here." Orson dismounted, his expression thunderous as he saw Mei Lin standing confidently beside Jackson. "She is my brother's wife," he snapped. "This is a deception, nothing more." "We have documentation," Mei Lin spoke up, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Reverend Miller performed our ceremony yesterday. I am legally Mrs. Hayward now." "Convenient timing," Orson sneered. "Especially since she was Mrs. Feng Chen until very recently." Jackson stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Mei Lin. "Why don't we discuss this inside, Sheriff? We have all the necessary paperwork, and I believe you'll find everything in order." Burke studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Chen, you and my deputies wait out here. This will go more smoothly if I handle the initial questions myself." Orson began to protest, but the sheriff silenced him with a raised hand. "This is my jurisdiction, Mr. Chen. We'll do this my way." Inside the cabin, Burke removed his hat and accepted the coffee Mei Lin offered. His gaze swept the interior, noting the obvious signs of a woman's presence: curtains at the windows, organized shelves, children's drawings pinned neatly to one wall. "Let's see this documentation then," he said, settling at the table. Jackson produced the marriage certificate and supporting papers, which Burke reviewed carefully. "Reverend Miller's signature looks genuine," he admitted. "But there's still the matter of her previous marriage. Mr. Chen claims his brother's wife suffered a breakdown after childbirth and kidnapped his children. Says you're harboring her illegally." "I left because my husband's family beat me when I gave birth to a 4th daughter instead of a son," Mei Lin stated plainly, turning her face to reveal the faint remains of bruises that had not yet completely faded. "They kept my newborn daughter and told me they would sell her as a servant when she was old enough. Then they cast me out with my other children, with no money and nowhere to go in winter." Burke's expression remained professional, but something in his eyes softened slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Hayward." "It is the truth," Mei Lin replied simply. "Ask my daughters if you wish. Even the youngest remembers what happened." "Where are your children now?" Burke asked, glancing around the cabin. "Safe," Jackson answered, not elaborating further. "Sheriff, under territorial law, a wife's legal status transfers to her current husband. Even if there were questions about Mei Lin's previous marriage, our union supersedes those claims now. Burke sighed, rubbing his forehead. Law's complicated. When it comes to Chinese immigrants, Hayward, the Exclusion Act has created a mess of contradictions. The law is also clear about a husband's right to protect his family, Jackson countered. Whatever her status before, Mei Lin is my wife now, which makes her daughters my responsibility as well. Before Burke could respond, shouting erupted outside. Jackson moved quickly to the window, cursing under his breath at what he saw. Chen's men are searching the property, he reported grimly. Looking for the girls, I'd guess. Burke stood, his expression hardening. I didn't authorize that. He moved to the door, calling out sharply, Chen, get your men back here now. The command came too late. One of Orson's companions had discovered the entrance to the root cellar and was dragging the hidden trapdoor open despite the protests of Burke's deputies. Jackson grabbed his shotgun from beside the door, but before he could step outside, Mei Lin moved past him with surprising speed. By the time Burke and Jackson reached the yard, she was standing over the root cellar entrance, a kitchen knife held steadily in her hand, facing down Orson's man. You will not touch my children, she stated, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent yard. The tableau froze for a heartbeat. Mei Lin poised like a mother wolf defending her cubs, the man hesitating before her unexpected fierceness, and Orson watching from horseback with calculated assessment. Sheriff Burke broke the tension, striding forward with authority. That's enough. Everyone stand down. He turned to Orson, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. You're overstepping, Chen. I agreed to investigate, not to raid this property. She's hiding my brother's children, Orson insisted, though he signaled his man to back away from Mei Lin. We have a right to reclaim them. You have no rights. Here, Jackson stated, positioning himself beside Mei Lin, shotgun lowered but ready. This is my property and these are my wife's children. Any claim the Chen family had has been legally superseded by our marriage. Burke turned to his deputies. Simmons, escort Mr. Chen and his companion back to their horses. Keep them there while I sort this out. When Orson had been reluctantly removed from the immediate vicinity, Burke addressed Mei Lin directly. Ma'am, I need to see your children, not to take them, he added quickly, seeing her expression, just to confirm they're unharmed and to hear their account. After exchanging a glance with Jackson, Mei Lin nodded. Minnie, she called softly into the cellar, you can come up now. Bring your sisters. 3 small faces appeared in the opening, eyes wide with fear, until they spotted their mother. They emerged cautiously, gathering around Mei Lin's skirts, watching the sheriff with undisguised wariness. Burke knelt to their level, his voice gentling. Hello there, I'm Sheriff Burke. Would you mind answering a few questions for me? Minnie, the 8-year-old, stepped slightly forward, assuming her role as spokesperson for her sisters. Are you going to make us go back to Grandfather Chen's house? She asked directly. Not if you don't want to, Burke assured her. I just need to understand what happened. Were you happy living with your father's family? The question opened a floodgate of childish honesty. Minnie described how their grandmother had called them worthless, how their father had ignored them entirely, focusing only on his business and the hope for a son. Heather, typically silent, spoke up about the day their mother had been beaten. Because the new baby was a girl like us. Lily simply clung to Jackson's leg, declaring with 4-year-old absolutism, This is our home now. Papa Jackson doesn't hit Mama. The simplicity of the child's statement seemed to settle something for Burke. He rose, replacing his hat with a decisive movement. I've heard enough. Mr. Hayward, Mrs. Hayward, your documentation appears in order, and I see no evidence of coercion or wrongdoing here. As far as I'm concerned, this matter is closed. You can't be serious, Orson protested from where he was being detained near the horses. "They've obviously been coached. My brother has rights to his children." "Your brother should have thought about his rights before allowing his wife to be beaten and cast out," Burke replied coldly. "As it stands, she's legally remarried, which under territorial law grants her new husband legal guardianship of her children. If your brother wants to contest that, he can file a formal petition with the territorial court in Helena." The mention of formal legal proceedings visibly dampened Orson's protests. The Chen family's business practices would not withstand the scrutiny of a territorial court investigation, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he warned as he mounted his horse, echoing his threat from the previous confrontation. "The Chen family doesn't forget such insults." "Neither do the Haywoods," Jackson replied evenly, one arm protectively around Mei Lin's shoulders, the other still holding his shotgun. "Remember that when you consider your next move." As the Chen contingent rode away, with one of Burke's deputies following to ensure they left the property entirely, the sheriff lingered briefly. "Word of advice, Hayward. The Chen family has influence, even beyond Silver Creek. Might want to consider moving somewhere they'd have trouble finding you, at least until things cool down." Jackson shook his head firmly. "This is our home. We're not being driven from it." Burke studied them both, the determined rancher and the equally resolute Chinese woman who had transformed herself from victim to defender, and nodded with something approaching respect. "Then strengthen your defenses and watch your backs. I'll do what I can to keep an official eye on the situation, but my jurisdiction has limits." After the sheriff departed, the family retreated inside the cabin, the tension of the confrontation leaving them all drained. Mei Lin prepared a simple lunch, while Jackson distracted the girls with small wooden toys he had been carving in the evenings, a hobby rediscovered after years of neglect. "Do you think they will return?" Mei Lin asked quietly when the children were occupied. Jackson considered the question carefully. "Not immediately. Burke's involvement complicates things for them. But eventually, yes, I think Orson Chen is too proud and too invested to simply walk away." Rather than frightening her, his honesty seemed to strengthen Mei Lin's resolve. "Then we must be prepared, not just with defenses, but with a future they cannot threaten." "What do you mean?" Jackson asked, intrigued by the determination in her voice. "We must build something here that cannot be easily destroyed," she explained, her gaze drifting to her daughters. "A life so firmly established that no one would dare try to unravel it, not just surviving, but thriving." The insight struck Jackson powerfully. For months, years really, since Emily's death, he had been merely existing, watching his ranch slowly fail as his motivation withered. Mei Lin and her daughters had brought purpose back into his life, but until this moment, he had been thinking defensively rather than constructively. "You're right," he said, something like excitement entering his voice for the first time in recent memory. "We need to build, not just fortify. I've got plans for this place that I set aside after Emily died. Ideas for expanding the herd, improving the breeding stock, maybe even adding sheep if we can secure the right grazing land." As they talked through possibilities, their vision expanded beyond mere survival to genuine prosperity. A ranch that could support their blended family and perhaps even create opportunities for others who needed a fresh start. By evening, Jackson had retrieved dusty ledgers and blueprints from a trunk long untouched, spreading them across the table as Mei Lin offered practical suggestions and thoughtful questions. The girls, sensing the change in atmosphere, gathered around curiously. "Are we building something, Papa Jackson?" Minnie asked, using the title that all three had now adopted with childish decisiveness. "Yes," he answered, smiling at their interest. "We're building a future, and I'll need strong helpers. Think you girls are up to the task?" Their enthusiastic response filled the cabin with a joy that seemed to push back the shadows of the day's confrontation. As Mei Lin watched her daughters crowd around Jackson, eagerly examining his drawings and offering their own imaginative additions, she felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crackling fire in the hearth. This marriage might have begun as a pragmatic arrangement for protection, but something more was taking root, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Whether or not romantic love ever blossomed between them, they were already building something equally valuable, a true family forged in adversity and strengthened by common goals. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Mei Lin and Jackson stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. The gold band on her finger no longer felt strange or foreign. It had already become a part of her, much like the role of Mrs. Hayward was becoming less a disguise and more an identity she had chosen for herself. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking us in that night? All the trouble we've brought to your door?" Jackson considered her questions seriously, as he did all things. "Not for a moment," he finally replied. "Before you arrived, I was just waiting for time to pass. Now I'm building again, planning, looking forward." He turned to face her directly. How could I regret that? The simple honesty of his answer confirmed what Mei Lin had begun to understand, that in helping her and her daughters, Jackson Hayward had also saved himself from a different kind of exile, the isolation of grief too long endured alone. As they stood together under the star-filled sky, the challenges ahead remained formidable. The Chen family's threats still lingered, and building their ambitious vision for the ranch would require years of hard work. Yet, in that moment, both felt a certainty that had eluded them separately, the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it not alone, but together as a family united by choice rather than merely by circumstance or convenience. The summer months transformed Hayward Ranch in ways that went beyond the natural cycle of seasons. Under the combined efforts of Jackson and Mei Lin, the struggling cattle operation began to show signs of renewal. The surviving herd, strengthened by Mei Lin's herbal feed supplements, produced healthy calves that frolicked in fields now carefully. Managed with techniques she remembered from her grandmother's teachings in China, the vegetable garden tripled in size, with neat rows of unfamiliar plants growing alongside traditional Montana staples. Chinese vegetables whose seeds Mei Lin had carefully preserved during her journey to America years earlier. The cabin, too, evolved to accommodate its growing family. Jackson added a proper bedroom for the girls, adjacent to the main structure, using lumber he traded for with neighboring ranchers. The loft became Jackson and Mei Lin's private space, though they maintained separate sleeping areas divided by a handcrafted screen, an arrangement that honored the practical origins of their marriage while acknowledging the deepening friendship that had developed between them. Word of their unusual family spread throughout the region, drawing mixed reactions. Some neighbors avoided them entirely, uncomfortable with the cultural crossing of boundaries. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Emily's friendship with Mei Lin years earlier during her brief visits to town, offered cautious support. A few families even made a point of inviting the Haywards to community gatherings, their children becoming playmates with Minnie, Heather, and Lily. Through it all, Jackson and Mei Lin remained vigilant. The Chen family's threats had not materialized into direct action since the sheriff's visit, but neither believed the danger had passed. Jackson installed additional locks on all doors and maintained regular shooting practice for both himself and Mei Lin. They established communication systems with trustworthy neighbors to alert them of strangers asking questions about a Chinese woman and her daughters. One warm July afternoon, Jackson returned from town with mail and supplies, his expression unusually thoughtful as he helped Mei Lin unpack their provisions. "Something troubles you," she observed, not phrasing it as a question. In the months Of their marriage, she had become adept at reading his moods. Jackson nodded, pulling a newspaper from his saddlebag. Notice in the Silver Creek Gazette. Chen families selling their business interests and moving to San Francisco, leaving by end of summer, according to this. Mei Lin took the paper, scanning the article with the English reading skills she had been diligently improving. Do you believe it? Not entirely, Jackson admitted. Could be a ruse to lower our guard. But Tom at the general store says they've already sold the mercantile to the Wilsons, and there's talk of the mining claims being transferred to an Eastern company. Hope and suspicion warred in Mei Lin's expression. If true, it could mean safety for the girls. Feng always spoke of returning to San Francisco eventually. Perhaps he has found a new wife there, as they planned. Jackson studied her face, searching for signs of regret or longing at the mention of her former husband. Finding none, he continued, "There's something else. Tom heard rumors that the infant, your daughter, was sent to relatives in San Francisco months ago." The news struck Mei Lin like a physical blow. She grasped the edge of the table to steady herself, eyes closing briefly as she processed this information. "She lives, then," she whispered, "but so far away." Jackson placed a hesitant hand on her shoulder, the casual contact still somewhat new between them despite their legal union. "San Francisco isn't the moon. It's a journey that can be made." Mei Lin's eyes opened, surprise evident in them. "You would consider such a thing? Traveling to find her?" "Not immediately," Jackson clarified. "We've put everything into building here, and we need at least another year to stabilize the ranch. But yes, I would consider it. She's your daughter, which makes her family." The simplicity of his statement, the unquestioning inclusion of her lost child in his definition of family, touched Mei Lin deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, covering his hand with her own, "for understanding what she means to me even, though you have never met her." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Mei Lin shared stories of her homeland with Jackson, not the sanitized versions she had offered earlier in their acquaintance, but genuine memories of her childhood in Guangdong province. She spoke of lotus ponds and ancestor shrines, of village festivals and the wisdom of her grandmother who had been a respected healer in their community. Jackson listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed his genuine interest in understanding her background. When darkness fell and they moved inside, he reciprocated with stories of his own Pennsylvania childhood, the son of a blacksmith who had dreamed of open spaces and a different kind of life than the industrial towns of the East could offer. "Emily thought I was mad when I first suggested Montana," he recalled with a faint smile. "But she believed in me enough to come along, said she'd rather face uncertainty with me than certainty without me." "She was a wise woman," Mei Lin observed, "to recognize that safety is not always found in the familiar." Jackson nodded, his expression reflective rather than pained at the memory of his first wife, a subtle but significant shift. "She would have liked you," he said after a moment. "Probably would have badgered me into building that addition to the cabin years ago instead of just talking about it." "I think I would have liked her too," Mei Lin replied with genuine warmth. "Anyone who could match your stubbornness would earn my respect." The gentle teasing, another new development in their relationship, brought a surprised chuckle from Jackson. "Says the woman who refused to use the rifle until she could hit the target 10 times in a row." Their laughter, shared in the warm glow of lamplight, marked another milestone in their evolving partnership. The calculated alliance formed for protection had grown into something neither had anticipated, a genuine companionship based on mutual respect and growing affection. As summer progressed toward autumn, the newspaper's announcement proved accurate. The Chen family's properties in Silver Creek were indeed sold, their possessions packed into wagons bound for the railroad that would carry them to San Francisco. Sheriff Burke, maintaining his promise to keep an eye on the situation, rode out to Haywood Ranch personally to deliver the news of their departure. "Thought you'd want confirmation," he explained, accepting the coffee Mei Lin offered. "Watched them leave myself this morning. Orson Chen, his brother Feng, the old mother, and about a dozen associates, all gone." Mei Lin's hands trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "Did you? Was there any sign of an infant? A baby girl, about 8 months old now?" Burke shook his head. "No children in the party. But that matches what I heard. The baby was sent to relatives in California months ago, right after you left." The confirmation both relieved and pained Mei Lin. Her youngest daughter lived, but remained beyond reach. At least for now. "You think this means the danger's past?" Jackson asked, practical as always. Burke considered the question carefully. "Orson made a point of stopping by my office before they left. Said some things about unfinished business that could have been taken as threats. But honestly, the Chens are businessmen first. With their operations moving to San Francisco, maintaining a vendetta in Montana territory becomes expensive and impractical. Unless the matter is personal rather than practical," Mei Lin observed quietly. "There is that," Burke acknowledged. "But my gut says they're done here. Doesn't mean you should stop being careful, but maybe you can breathe a little easier." After the sheriff departed, Jackson found Mei Lin in the garden, methodically harvesting late summer vegetables while tears streamed silently down her face. Without a word, he knelt beside her and began helping, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate plants. "I should feel only relief that they are gone," Mei Lin finally said, not looking up from her work. "Instead, I feel as though I have lost her again, my daughter, knowing she's farther away now." "We'll find her," Jackson promised, the quiet certainty in his voice causing Mei Lin to finally meet his gaze. "Not immediately. We need to ensure the ranch is secure, build our savings. But I give you my word, Mei Lin, we will go to San Francisco and search for your daughter." The promise, offered without hesitation or qualification, cemented something fundamental between them. This was no longer merely a marriage of convenience, but a true partnership with shared goals and commitments that extended far beyond their initial arrangement. That night, after the girls were asleep, Jackson brought out a battered tin box he kept in the bottom of his trunk. Inside was a small leather pouch that clinked as he placed it on the table between them. "Emily's mother's wedding jewelry," he explained, opening the pouch to reveal several gold pieces and a small collection of gemstones. "Been saving it for when the ranch hit truly desperate times. Never touched it, even when things were at their worst after she died." Mei Lin stared at the small treasure, understanding immediately its significance. "Jackson, no, this is your emergency fund, your security." "It's our security now," he corrected gently. "And finding your daughter is exactly the kind of emergency it's meant for. We'll sell just enough to finance the journey when the time comes." The casual hour, the unquestioning inclusion of her priorities within his definition of shared purpose, moved Mei Lin profoundly. Impulsively, she reached across the table and covered his weathered hand with her own. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Jackson turned his palm upward, hesitantly interlacing his fingers with hers. The first time he had initiated such intimate contact outside the formal requirements of their wedding ceremony. "Family takes care of family," he said simply. "All of them." As autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, the rhythm of ranch life intensified with harvest and preparations for winter. The vegetable garden yielded a bounty that Mei Lin preserved, with techniques combining Chinese tradition and Montana practicality. Jackson's expanded herd, healthier than in previous years, promised better chances of survival through the coming cold months. The girls thrived in their new environment. Minnie, now 9, had become Jackson's shadow, absorbing ranching knowledge with remarkable aptitude. Heather, whose quiet nature had once been mistaken for timidity, revealed a profound connection with animals, developing an almost uncanny ability to calm nervous horses and predict when a cow was about to calve. Lily, at 5, brought laughter to the household with her innocent observations and boundless energy. One crisp October morning, Mei Lin was mixing dough for steamed buns, a traditional Chinese recipe that had become a family favorite. When she noticed Jackson standing in the doorway watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked, pausing in her work. "No," he replied, seeming almost surprised by her question. "Just thinking about how different this place feels now. A year ago, I was just going through the motions. Now—" He gestured vaguely around the kitchen, taking in the herbs hanging from the rafters, children's drawings pinned to the walls, and the general sense of lived-in warmth that permeated the once Spartan cabin. "Now it's a home again," he finished simply. Mei Lin smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. "For me as well," she admitted. "I never felt truly at home in the Chen household. Always an outsider, valued only for what I might produce, not for who I was." "And here?" Jackson asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question. "Here I am, Mei Lin Hayward," she replied thoughtfully. "Wife, mother, gardener, healer, a person with value beyond bearing sons." She met his gaze directly. "Here I am seen." The simple statement carried profound weight for both of them. In the months of their marriage, they had moved gradually from wary allies to trusted partners to something more complex, a relationship without easy definition, but built on genuine appreciation of each other's strengths and acceptance of their weaknesses. Jackson took a step into the kitchen, then hesitated. "Mei Lin, I've been thinking about our arrangement." Her hands stilled in the dough. "Yes? When we married, it was for protection, practical, made sense at the time." He paused, searching for words with the careful deliberation that characterized all his important communications. "But things have changed, at least for me." Mei Lin's heart quickened, though her expression remained composed. "How have they changed, Jackson?" He moved closer, stopping within arm's reach. "I find myself thinking of you when we're apart, noticing things just to tell you about them later, looking forward to evenings when the girls are asleep and it's just us talking." The simple confession, delivered with his characteristic straightforwardness, touched Mei Lin deeply. "I have similar thoughts," she admitted softly. Encouraged, Jackson continued, "I respect our arrangement, the separate sleeping areas, the boundaries we established. But I wanted you to know that for me, this hasn't been just a paper marriage for some time now." Mei Lin studied his face, the weathered lines, the steady blue eyes that had always looked at her with respect rather than assessment. "For me as well," she confessed. "But I did not wish to complicate matters. You have already done so much. For us." "It's not about doing for," Jackson clarified. "It's about being with, building something together, and I find myself wanting more than just a practical partnership." He took a deep breath. "I'd like us to consider a real marriage, and always, but only if that's what you want too." The proposal hung in the air between them, fraught with significance. For Mei Lin, whose first marriage had been arranged without her input and conducted without her consent, this represented something revolutionary, a choice freely offered, and awaiting her uncoerced decision. Before she could respond, the thundering of approaching horses shattered the moment. Jackson moved instantly to the window, his expression shifting from vulnerable to vigilant in an instant. "4 riders," he reported tersely. "Coming fast. Get the girls." The hard-won peace of the past months evaporated as they moved with practiced efficiency into their defensive protocol. Mei Lin hurried to the garden where the girls were helping harvest the last root vegetables before frost, hustling them inside and down to the secure cellar space that had been further reinforced since their first confrontation with the Chens. Jackson retrieved his rifle, checking that it was loaded before positioning himself on the porch, a clear view of the approaching riders. As they drew closer, however, his posture relaxed slightly. "It's Burke," he called to Mei Lin. "Sheriff's with them." Relief mingled with renewed tension. The sheriff wouldn't ride out with deputies unless something significant had occurred. Mei Lin joined Jackson on the porch as the riders pulled up in the yard, recognizing Burke among them, but not the others. "Haywood," Burke greeted, dismounting with the stiffness of a man who had ridden hard and long. "Mrs. Haywood, sorry to arrive unannounced, but this couldn't wait." "What's happened?" Jackson asked, not lowering his rifle entirely. Burke gestured to one of his companions, a well-dressed man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "This is Mr. Lawrence Wilson, attorney from San Francisco. He's been looking for Mrs. Haywood." Alarm flashed across Mei Lin's face, her hand instinctively seeking Jackson's arm. "Why would a San Francisco attorney be searching for me?" Wilson stepped forward, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Haywood, or Mrs. Chen as you were previously known. I represent the estate of Mrs. Hua Zhang, recently deceased in San Francisco." The name meant nothing to Mei Lin, and her confusion showed clearly. "I do not know this person." "Mrs. Zhang was the maternal aunt of your former husband, Feng Chen," Wilson explained. "She was also, until her death 3 weeks ago, the guardian of a female infant placed in her care by the Chen family approximately 7 months ago." Mei Lin's grip on Jackson's arm tightened painfully as the implication of Wilson's words became clear. "My daughter," she whispered. "You are speaking of my daughter." Wilson nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. The child was given to Mrs. Zhang with documentation identifying you as her mother. Upon Mrs. Zhang's death, her will specified that efforts should be made to locate you and inform you of the situation." Hope and fear warred in Mei Lin's expression. "Where is she now?" "My daughter. Currently in the care of Mrs. Zhang's housekeeper." "In San Francisco," Wilson replied, "a temporary arrangement pending resolution of certain legal matters." Jackson, who had remained protectively close to Mei Lin throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "What legal matters?" Wilson extracted a document from his leather portfolio. Mrs. Zhang's will contained specific provisions regarding the child. She believed the infant had been wrongfully separated from her mother and wished to correct this injustice. She has left provisions for the child's care and a sum to facilitate reunification with her mother, if that is what Mrs. Haywood desires. The possibility, suddenly transformed from distant hope to immediate reality, momentarily overwhelmed Mei Lin. She swayed slightly, steadied by Jackson's supportive arm around her shoulders. "Of course she desires it," Jackson stated firmly when Mei Lin seemed unable to speak. "That child is her daughter. We've been planning to search for her when circumstances permitted." Burke, who had been quietly observing, added, "I can vouch for that. They've mentioned the missing infant since the first time I met them." Wilson nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then there is one final matter to address. Mrs. Zhang was aware that Mrs. Haywood had other children. Her will stipulates that the financial provision, a not inconsiderable sum, is for the benefit of all of Mrs. Haywood's daughters, not just the infant." He handed the document to Jackson, whose eyes widened as he scanned its contents. "This is substantial." "Mrs. Zhang was a wealthy woman in her own right," Wilson confirmed, "and childless. She apparently developed a significant attachment to the infant during their months together and came to disapprove strongly of her nephew's treatment of their Chinese wives and daughters. Mei Lin, finally finding her voice, asked the question that mattered most to her. How soon can we go to her, to my daughter? I am returning to San Francisco next week, Wilson replied. You would be welcome to travel with me. The railroad makes the journey considerably more manageable than it once was. Jackson and Mei Lin exchanged a look laden with unspoken communication, hopes, fears, practical considerations, all conveyed in a single glance, honed by months of partnership. We'll need a few days to make arrangements, Jackson decided. The ranch can't be left untended, especially with winter approaching. Burke stepped forward. My nephew's looking for ranch work. Good kid, reliable. Could watch the place for a few weeks if needed. The practical obstacle addressed, Mei Lin turned to Wilson with renewed intensity. My daughter, does she have a name? Mrs. Zhang called her Pearl, Wilson replied gently, though I understand that was not her given name from the Chen family. They did not give her a name at all, Mei Lin said, a flash of old pain crossing her features. They deemed her unworthy of one. Jackson's arm tightened around her shoulders. Pearl is a fine name, he said quietly. Strong, valuable, hidden at first but revealed with time. The appropriateness of the name, chosen by a stranger yet somehow perfect, struck Mei Lin forcefully. Yes, she agreed, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. Pearl. It suits her. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Jackson arranged for Burke's nephew to care for the ranch and livestock during their absence. Mei Lin packed necessities for herself and the three girls, who received the news of their baby sister with excitement tempered by nervousness about the long journey ahead. The night before their departure, after the children were asleep, Jackson and Mei Lin sat at the kitchen table finalizing details. The conversation they had begun before Wilson's arrival remained unaddressed, both seemingly hesitant to revisit such personal matters amid the practical demands of their upcoming journey. Finally, Jackson set aside the list he had been reviewing and reached across the table for Mei Lin's hand. Before all this happened, we were talking about something important. Mei Lin nodded, her expression softening. You were speaking of wanting a true marriage, beyond our practical arrangement. My feelings haven't changed, Jackson assured her. If anything, seeing your joy at the prospect of reuniting with your daughter has only deepened them. But I understand if you need time, especially with everything that's happening. Mei Lin studied their joined hands, his large and weathered, hers smaller but equally marked by work and experience. In my culture, marriage is traditionally arranged for family advantage or alliance. Love is considered a pleasant possibility, but not a requirement. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. I never expected to find both in the same marriage. The implication of her words hung in the air between them, a delicate hope neither had dared articulate so plainly before. Are you saying, Jackson began cautiously. I am saying that what began as necessity has grown into choice, Mei Lin confirmed, her voice soft but certain. And given the choice, I would choose you, Jackson Hayward, not just as the protector of my daughters or the provider of our home, but as my true husband in every sense. The simple declaration, all the more powerful for its understated delivery, transformed Jackson's expression from cautious hope to profound joy. He rose, still holding her hand, and drew her gently to her feet. May I kiss you? He asked, the formal request reflecting his deep respect for her boundaries and past experiences. In answer, Mei Lin stepped closer, tilting her face upward in silent invitation. Their first real kiss was gentle and brief, yet filled with promise. Not The culmination of their journey together, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. As they prepared for sleep that night, still in their separate spaces, but with a new understanding between them, Mei Lin reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her to this moment. A year ago, she had been beaten and abandoned, trudging through snow with 3 frightened daughters and no hope beyond immediate survival. Now she stood on the threshold of reuniting with her lost infant, financially secure thanks to an unexpected benefactor, and genuinely loved by a man who had first offered shelter and then, gradually, his heart. The journey ahead would bring challenges, certainly. Integrating Pearl into their family, navigating the social complexities of their unusual marriage, building the ranch into the thriving operation they envisioned. None would be simple tasks. Yet Mei Lin faced the future with a confidence that would have been unimaginable in her previous life. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, noticing her contemplative expression as she prepared to climb the ladder to the loft. Mei Lin smiled, the genuine happiness in her face transforming her from merely pretty to truly beautiful. "I am thinking that sometimes what appears to be the end of one's path is merely a turning onto a better road." Jackson nodded, understanding the deeper truth in her words. And sometimes, what looks like an act of charity turns out to be the greatest gift to the giver. As they bid each other good night, the last they would spend under this roof before embarking on their journey to complete their family, both recognized the profound transformation that had occurred since that snowy night when a desperate woman and her daughters had appeared on a lonely rancher's doorstep. What had begun as a temporary shelter from danger had become a true home. What had started as a marriage of convenience had evolved into a union of genuine choice and deepening love. And what had seemed like the end of Mei Lin's hopes when she was cast out for birthing a 4th daughter had become instead the beginning of a life richer than she had ever dared imagine. One where daughters were treasured, where a woman's worth extended far beyond her ability to produce sons, and where family was defined not by blood alone, but by the daily choice to nurture and protect those who had been entrusted to one's care. As dawn broke over Hayward Ranch the next morning, the family began their journey toward San Francisco and the final piece of their shared future, the daughter who would complete their extraordinary circle of love and redemption. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us